Hello everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am bringing you my September mid-month wrap-up. For those of you that are new to my channel, I do 2 wrap-ups per month just because I read so many books per month and I don't want to make a really long video at the end of each month, and I also don't want to feel like I have to speed through my reviews of each book that I read, so I think it's just better for everybody if I do 2 separate videos. And today I have 8 books to talk about, so without further ado, let's get started. So the first book that I want to talk about is Three Dark Crowns by Kendara Blake. This is a YA fantasy series that I have really wanted to get into for a while now. So this essentially follows 3 triplets whose names are Mirabella, Arsinoe, and Catherine. They are 3 queens of the island of Fenburn, and essentially they are raised so that one day one of them will kill the other 2 off. So yeah, as you can tell from the synopsis, this is a pretty dark and intense fantasy series, and to be honest, I liked this installment. This is the very first book, obviously, but it was very, very slow moving the entire time, which is why I ended up giving it only 3 stars. There are some really cool things that happen throughout, and I really liked all of the characters, but it just moved at such a glacial pace pretty much the entire time. There were a few times where I thought the pacing was actually pretty good, but yeah, for the most part this was pretty slow, and based on some reviews that I've read on Goodreads, a lot of other people agree with that sentiment. But what's really great is that the series tends to pick up a lot more starting with the next book, which is called One Dark Throne, so I'm definitely really looking forward to continuing with the series. But I did really enjoy the world. I think it's very interesting that this is like a matriarchal society, and it's also a queendom as opposed to a kingdom. The men in this society don't hold that much power. Also, just so you guys know, I like to do my wrap-ups to where I work my way from the book that I like the least to the book that I like the most. So with that being said, the next book that I want to talk about is Wicked and the Wallflower by Sarah MacLean. This is actually the very first book of Sarah MacLean's that I have ever read. I took this recommendation from Amanda from The Naughty Librarian. I will link her channel down below. I recently discovered her channel and I'm absolutely obsessed with her. I love her videos so much, and she's kind of like a connoisseur of historical romances, and she really enjoys Sarah MacLean's works, so I thought that I would check out this book. And this is a part of a series called The Bare Knuckle Bastards, I believe, and this is really interesting because this is more of like a darker historical romance series. So essentially this one, and this is the first book in the series, follows Felicity and Devil, although Devil is not his real name, that's just his street name. But basically Felicity and Devil kind of make a deal with one another. Felicity basically wants to get back into the good graces of the London society, and Devil is trying to get revenge against somebody. But Felicity is not aware of his motivations, and as you can kind of tell, they do end up falling in love in the process. So I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 3.5 stars. I think what kept me from giving it a full 4-star rating is that I feel like there was just a little too much conflict between Felicity and Devil throughout this book as to why they couldn't be together. Just felt like every few pages a new fight would start or a new conflict would come into play, and that just kind of lowered my enjoyment level, to be honest. But I am definitely looking forward to checking out more of Sarah MacLean's books as well as the other books in this series. The next book I want to discuss is Champion by Marie Lu. This is the 3rd and final book in the Legend trilogy. So I talked about the first 2 books in this trilogy being Legend and Prodigy in my August wrap-up, so if you're interested to hear my thoughts about those 2 books, definitely go check out that video. So this was the final book, and I did kind of go into it with high expectations, but at the same time, you know, I enjoyed the first 2 books. I gave them both 3.5 stars, so at the same time I wasn't expecting too much. But I have to say, Marie Lu definitely stepped it up with the finale of this trilogy. I had to give it 4 stars. Really what sold it for me was the ending. I would say the last hour or so of the audiobook is really what made me love this installment. It just went in a completely different direction than I was expecting, and while I was heartbroken, there was also a little hope at the end, and it was just a really cool ending. I think after reading this book, I definitely would recommend that you guys read the trilogy. fantasy. Like I said in my August wrap-up, this may not be the most original dystopian futuristic story, but I did like the direction that this went, especially in this last installment. So if you are looking for a fast-paced YA dystopian story, I think that you would enjoy this. All right, here comes the brick. Are y'all ready? So the next book I want to discuss is The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. As you can tell, this is a huge book. It is well over 800 pages. This is a book that I've definitely been interested in checking out, but I definitely wasn't motivated to pick it up. The only reason why I did was because the book club that I am a part of picked this for the month of September, and it was really great because we chose to read it over the span of 10 days. Usually we read our books over the span of like 3 or 4 days, but with a book this massive, it was a really good decision to split it up over 10 days. So this is an adult standalone fantasy novel, and it is also a kind of complicated plot. So this is basically set in a world where there is an east and there is a west, and the two are divided not only by an ocean, but they are also divided by religion and ideals. And we basically follow quite a few POVs that either are based in the east or based in the west. The main plot of the story is that there is this really evil dragon known as the Nameless One that after the span of 1,000 years is set to awaken once again and wreak havoc on this world. So first of all, I am just so proud of myself that I actually finished this book. I will be completely honest with you guys. I went into this book giving myself full permission to DNF it because I just didn't think that it was written for me. And honestly, after finishing it, I still don't think that this was a book that was really intended for someone like me. Just to tell you a little bit about like my fantasy reading preferences, I actually have never really read an adult fantasy before, and based on quite a few people's reviews on BookTube, this is probably not the best book to start with if you have never read an adult fantasy, just because of how complicated the plot is. I think what ultimately kept me from DNFing this is that Samantha Shannon does have a relatively simplistic writing style. So even though she throws a lot of information at you, such as names and countries and cities and different myths and stories in this world, I was still able to retain a lot of it just because of how relatively simplistic her writing style is, which I really, really appreciated as someone who is not well versed in adult fantasy. I think with this book, you definitely have to just kind of go with the flow in a manner of speaking, because in like the first 100 or so pages, I definitely was getting overwhelmed by all the information that was getting thrown at me, and I think that's what was leading me to almost DNF this. But I think once I kind of just went with the flow and kept reading, I eventually started retaining all of the important information that I needed to. So if you are a pretty patient fantasy reader, I think you would definitely enjoy this. One gripe that I do have is that this was definitely marketed as an epic fantasy with dragons and a great female-female romance, as well as a male-male romance. But those aspects of the book I actually had issue with. For one thing, I think that this could have used more dragons overall. There was a really cool storyline that was following a dragon rider and other dragon riders and all of these dragons that they have, but that storyline ended kind of abruptly earlier on in the book than I would have liked, so that kind of sucked. Also, the female-female romance was kind of a fail for me, to be quite honest. I wasn't really seeing the chemistry between the two characters at all. To me, it just seemed kind of forced on Shannon's part. While there were definitely hints that a romance was brewing between the two characters, I just didn't really believe it, and I didn't really believe in the romance. And as someone who absolutely loves romances, that was definitely disappointing. Also, the male-male romance in this definitely wasn't really spotlighted all that much, and one of the characters that was involved in that romance I really didn't care for, so again, I thought that that romance was a fail. But there are quite a few things that I did enjoy about this book, and there's a reason that I gave it 4 stars and not a lower rating. First of all, I have to commend Samantha Shannon on coming up with this beautifully rich and diverse world. For one thing, it was so interesting learning about the East and the West and how they're different, but also how they're similar in some ways. And I do think that overall the plot was very captivating and compelling. I mean, there's a reason that I read the whole thing. and the final battle was just as epic and full of dragons as I could have hoped. So yeah, overall, I definitely would recommend this if you are someone who is really, really into adult fantasy. If you are someone like me, I think you would enjoy it, but I don't think that you will give it 5 stars. But yeah, I'm just so proud of myself that I actually got through this whole book, and I'm glad that I did enjoy it at the end of the day. The next book I read is Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. For those of you guys that don't know, I am also doing a reading vlog series about my experience rereading these books for the very first time, which is really exciting. Overall, I gave this book 4 stars. If you want to know all of my in-depth thoughts, definitely go check out my vlog for this. I definitely enjoyed it, and I am still kind of shocked that I'm giving any of these books less than 5 stars. And overall, I do think that this book kind of suffers from the sophomore slump, but I am definitely looking forward to reading Prisoner of Azkaban next month because I do remember that book as being one of my favorites, if not my favorite of the series. All right, we only have a couple books left. The next 2 books that I read were Shadow Kiss and Blood Promise. These are books 3 and 4 of the Vampire Academy series. I enjoyed these both. I gave them 4 stars. Shadow Kiss in particular, I really enjoyed just because this installment really raised the stakes for all of the characters, and the ending of this one was just insane and heartbreaking. And then with Blood Promise, I also enjoyed this one. With this installment, I feel like the first half was a bit tedious and repetitive to get through, and I wasn't really loving the direction that the story was going in, but once we got to the second half, things really picked up, and I was just captivated and on the edge of my seat until the very end. I just love this series so much. I cannot wait to read the last 2 books in this series next month. I highly recommend it if you are just looking for a YA paranormal vampire series that is just fun and fast-paced. And I just love how Rochelle Mead continuously just steps it up with each installment, and each book the stakes get higher and higher. And yeah, I could talk about this series forever just because I've really been loving it. All right, and now to talk about my absolute favorite book of the month so far, and that is A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Bridget Kemmerer. So just to tell you a little bit about this plot, this is essentially a Beauty and the Beast retelling. We follow Prince Ren, who lives in this fantasy world called Emberfall, and he is cursed to essentially live the autumn of his 18th year over and over and over again, unless he can find a girl to fall in love with him and break the curse. And we also follow a teenage girl named Harper who has cerebral palsy, but she does not let that get in the way of her at all. And she lives in Washington, D.C., and one night she is in an alley and she sees this man trying to take this unconscious girl away, and she steps in and essentially ends up in the fantasy world of Emberfall. And it turns out that Harper may be Ren's last chance of breaking his curse. Oh my god! I loved this book so much. I mean, are we surprised though? Because I absolutely adore anything that Bridget Kemmerer writes. I kind of went into this not really knowing what to expect though, because mostly she does write YA contemporary romances, and this is definitely more of an urban fantasy novel. But oh my god, literally 4 pages in, I had a realization that I will always be trash for Beauty and the Beast retellings, even though this is the very first one that I have read. I have not read the Court of Thorns and Roses series yet, but I plan to very soon. And I think that stems from being a very young child and just absolutely adoring the Beauty and the Beast Disney film. Belle was like my favorite Disney princess for a long time, and then Mulan became my favorite Disney princess, but I just love the story so much, and I don't know what that says about me. That probably says that I am very messed up, given that this is kind of a story based around Stockholm Syndrome. At least the original story is. This retelling definitely does take the old story and turn it on its head in a lot of ways. Bridget Kemmerer actually makes a point to address Stockholm Syndrome and how that is definitely not the case in this book. So this is about a 500-page book, and it is definitely not the most fast-paced novel out there, I will say that. but there is something about Brigid Kemmerer's writing style that always just draws me in, and I had such an enjoyable reading experience with this. I just kind of loved savoring it and taking my time. I loved the characters. We have Prince Ren, Harper, and then Gray, who is essentially Prince Ren's right-hand man and the captain of the guard. I loved all three of their characters, as well as all of the characters in this book. They were all really well fleshed out. I also really enjoyed the world building of this, as well as just the overall plot. I also adored the CP rep in this. I just feel like we definitely need more rep like this in the fantasy genre, whether that be more disability rep or having more characters that are plus sized. I do have a couple of very small gripes with this book. They definitely weren't enough for me to lower my rating of 5 stars, but I did want to bring them up. For one thing, I really wanted Ren and Harper to have more of a discussion about Harper's CP, simply because Ren does not know what CP is, as he lives in another world where that doesn't exist. And I just kind of would have liked more of a discussion about how Harper's CP has affected her life or not affected her life, or how she has learned to live with it, or things like that, just to kind of help educate Ren. And I feel like it also could have been like a really good bonding experience between the two of them. But at the same time, I understand why Brigid Kemmerer didn't want to dwell too much on CP, because it is definitely not a focal point of the story. I also wanted to know more about Harper's backstory in general. We get a lot more information about Ren's backstory, but we don't get that much about Harper's. Maybe that's going to be something that's going to be explored in the coming sequel. But yeah, those were just a couple of things that I had minor gripes with. Otherwise, I absolutely adored this book. I cannot recommend it enough if you love YA fantasy and if you love Beauty and the Beast retellings. The ending of this was definitely unexpected and really cool, and I just cannot wait to read the sequel when it comes out in January. And that's going to be it for my mid-month wrap-up, you guys. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you would consider subscribing. Don't forget to push that notification bell button below so that you will be notified every time I upload. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!